first speaker is Kaeden Watts. He's a man who wears many hats. He's been to the UN climate talks a couple of times, representing Te Ara Whatu. He's in his professional role, he's an advisor to Te Puni Kōkiri and the Department of Prime Minister of Cabinet. And this audience will be particularly interested to know that Kaeden is advising on the setup of the new Māori Health Authority. So Kaeden, come on up and give us your vision for what a better Aotearoa looks like.
I've just got my sidekick here in case I go on a tangent, so I'll just speed that up. Kia ora koutou, huria hau no Ngāti Tū Wharitō me Ngāti Mania Poto Huki, ko Kaeden tōku ingoa. Very excited to be here. Thank you for having me at this symposium to share some kōrero. I'd like to start my kōrero off with just a little bit about myself, the community I represent and the work that I do. So I grew up in a small town west of Taupō called Taumaranui. If you haven't heard of it, that's cool, no one's heard of it. It's not an easy place to live. There's not a lot of resources, and the health of the community is in a bit of a dire state and has been for a long time. The economy that we had there has slowly been taken away, and therefore some of our community members have lost jobs as a result. The social determinants haven't been very kind to us. There's no bus system and there's only one doctor for the entire town, and he goes home to Hamilton on weekends. But that's home nonetheless. I know I can always go there to ground myself, and my whānau is still going to be there holding it down for the community. But as you can imagine, when COVID-19 first started running rampant, I was a bit anxious about what would happen if that ran through my community, and what resources we had to combat that. What happens if my whānau get it? Is someone checking in on my nan, making sure she has food in the cupboard? But when I saw the leadership of iwi around the country, my anxieties were put to rest slightly. Iwi didn't wait around to be told what to do. They just picked up their resources and said, all right, we'll show you how to do it. There were over 50 iwi developed pandemic response plans by April 2020. There were checkpoints before entering towns to tell incomers to err on the side of caution before you come in. Waikato Tainui knew the name of every single vulnerable person in the community, had whānau checking in on them, had food parcels coming to their door. And there was a 24/7 helpline in case whānau had any questions about what to do in the pandemic. But should we be surprised at how good the response was by iwi? No, absolutely not. We've known how to look after our own for years, a lot longer than we had colonial health models to tell us how to do it. We proved wrong the predictions that Māori would be more likely to catch the virus, but that still wasn't enough to protect us from the consequences. Unemployment for Māori skyrocketed, as we're usually the ones in low-paying, vulnerable work. Experience from previous recessions shows that unemployment takes 3 to 6 quarters longer to return to baseline for Māori than non-Māori. We often live in crowded homes with vulnerable tamariki and kaumātua, so rangatahi Māori were less likely to go back to school because whānau didn't want them catching the virus and bringing that back home. What COVID-19 has told us and has solidified is that the health system does not work for us. I don't need to read another report to tell me that. That's my day job. I do that every single day. I don't need to read another one. I just need it to change. I need lasting, transformative change. And when I thought about what that might look like, 2 things came to mind especially. I must have constitutional transformation that enables tino rangatiratanga to exist in the health system. The iwi response was a manifestation of what tino rangatiratanga could look like in the health system. Iwi leading the way, knowing the whānau, knowing the community, knowing how to get resources out. Oftentimes just using the marae computer to work out who needed what. It kept our community safe, and imagine what would happen if we had those resources at a larger scale. If we could develop strategic plans that could target all Māori nationally. So constitutional change needs to enable Māori to continue taking control over their health. And the second thing is it has to prioritise public health. We're in a disjointed system. Organisations don't speak to one another. DHBs work in silos, and there's no national coordination between them. The PHUs are working in silos also. There's no coordination there either. If we look to a Māori model of health, whānau order, there is a way to get these institutions to talk to each other, to get these organisations working together. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to give Māori that voice and that platform, that funding, to be able to develop these resources and plans for themselves. But I won't keep any more of your time. Kia ora, ngā mihi ki a koutou. Thank you.
Thanks, Kaeden. That was so insightful, and I love how you weave together the different strands that interact so much in people's lives, and given us a vision of what tino rangatiratanga looks like in action. So thank you. Our next speaker, I had the good fortune to meet last year when I was doing a teaching stint at Vic. Ali Leota at the time was the president of the National Pacifica Students Association, as well as completing his third year, and has now graduated and has a role at the Hawke's Bay DHB in an equity advisor role. And so I'd like to welcome Ali to the stage to present his vision.
Mahalo lava le sui fo mauma malalanga me ma o te whātalofa atu le mamalu awhio mai le taeao, talofa lava. I'm Ali Leota. I come from the villages of Mulifangua, Apulima Uta, Le Tongo and Ofuali'i. I'm a Dunedin-born Samoan, raised in a place called Paradise, just north of Wellington, but some of you may know it as Pūriro. I now serve the beautiful people of Hawke's Bay as a population health advisor at Hawke's Bay District Health Board. And I really want to thank Hawke's Bay DHB for allowing me to come home, to be here in front of you today, but also acknowledge Jude and Michael and the University of Otago for allowing me to speak alongside some phenomenal individuals who have influenced change. In particular, Professor Peter Crampton. You may not know, you're my mother's GP at Pūriro Union Health, and you happen to give her the news that life-changing news that she was pregnant with me. And in other news, you're the first person to know that I ever existed. So it's amazing how this world works. And she also says, thank you for not telling Nana at the time. But as I'm up here alongside three amazing young champions, I too am going to lay the challenge and share talanoa with you about the changes we need and the future I want for Aotearoa. And when we think about transformative change as a country, we pride ourselves on equality opportunity for all people. But to get there, we need to identify and remove the barriers to success so we can have a future to thrive in. And in October 1993, when Professor Peter Crampton shared the news of my mother, that moment changed the future she wanted as a Pacific teenage mother from Mana College. She wanted to be the change the world needed to help support Pacific mothers and families navigate the health system. And lucky enough, Mum was an agent of change, and she served as one of 3 Pacific midwives here in the Greater Wellington region. Although she played her part in creating change, it still wasn't enough because we need structural change to happen. And when we think about change for Pacific peoples, change is something we've been coping with since we first arrived here in Aotearoa. And I believe we are more than ready for transformative change to happen. But I don't think the system wants to change itself, especially when there's a lot of research and literature that continue to have a deficit view of Pacific and health. Although we have a Pacific Health Action Plan, it lacks the integrity of a Pacific Health investment strategy to ensure Pacific people's visions of a better life are fulfilled. Otherwise, we continue to miss out. I mean, if the government can make a decision overnight to bail out a bank, how come we can't have the same energy and appetite to remove the structural barriers to enable Pacific people to live healthier and resilient lives? And given with the recent experiences of COVID-19, yes, it highlighted inequities, but more importantly, it revealed how a cultural approach proved to be the transformative change Aotearoa needed. In Hawke's Bay, there is no Pacific health provider, but COVID-19 allowed the Pacific community to mobilise alongside Ngāti Kahungunu to form Tihei Moriora as a response to holistically support our ainga and whānau to get through the tough times. Tihei Moriora is more than just a response. It is a paradigm shift driven by Maori and Pacific values, solutions, aspirations and goals. Our country needs more of this to happen regularly. For the Pacific community, this was a beacon of hope and something to build on, but more importantly, it was a reminder that a cultural approach must come first. And there's a Samoan proverb that summarises the future I want for Aotearoa. E le sili le ta'i nai lau le tapuai. To lead is not as important as to support. And right now we need to move beyond cultural competency because it's just a flash way of saying tick in the box. We all need to take the extra step and champion cultural humility so we can appreciate, celebrate and support cultural approaches, whether it be Maori, Pacific. And essentially, Pacific people are experts as well. And to me, this looks like having a tangible health investment strategy so we can build onto momentums of other things like Tihei Moriora and Hawke's Bay and legitimising cultural approaches to help realise Pacific communities' dreams and aspirations. And the future I want is exactly the same as my grandparents who migrated from Samoa in the 60s, my teenage parents who had me in the early 90s at Otago University, and that's just for a better life. Awhitai tele mo awanoa, soifo. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. That was amazing. And I'm really intrigued by this concept of cultural humility. I think that's something we need to pick up again. Thank you. Our next speaker is Stacey Ryan. She's the Youth Advisor for the United Community Action Network, which is a consumer-based organisation that advocates not only for better health services, but also for the other basics that people need for a healthy life. So I'll hand over to Stacey.
Kia ora koutou katoa. I guess I don't really need to introduce myself. There's not much else that I can say. I've been asked to speak to you today about social issues and inequity in New Zealand. In my mind, they're one and the same thing. You can't talk about one without the other. When we first went into level 4 lockdown last March, all of New Zealand found out what it was like to be trapped inside their own homes, not allowed to socialise, only leaving for essential tasks such as healthcare and grocery shopping. Though for thousands of Kiwis, that was the case before COVID-19 ever hit our shores. For thousands of us, life stayed exactly the same. Some of us because of our health, some because of a lack of disposable income, and others still because of our age. Stats NZ reported that in the 4 weeks leading up to the end of their September 2020 quarter, 20% of the population felt lonely at least some of the time. The highest reports were from those who are unable to work, those with disabilities, lifelong illnesses, injuries, and the elderly, with 40%. Closely following were sole parents at 32%, and then the underutilised, the unemployed, the underemployed, and the potential labour force at 30%. In the 12 months to September 2020, 18% of Kiwis over the age of 18 had experienced discrimination. Again, sole parents led the pack at 31%, followed by Maori at 28%, the unemployed also with 28%, and those unable to work at 27%. A lot of this can also be related back to income, but I'll get to that shortly. It was recently reported that New Zealand's rainbow community are more likely to suffer from abuse and sexual assault at the hands of whānau members. Compared to the national average of 2.1% of familial sexual harm assaults, the LGBTQ community are twice as likely to experience this at 5.1% of reports. A survey based on data collected from 16,000 adults showed that 41% of homosexual and 47% of bisexual people had been sexually assaulted during their lifetime, compared to the national average of 30%. The survey found that 68% of bisexual adults will experience sexual harm in their lives. Compare that to the national average of 29%. However, only roughly half of the national average of sexual complaints come from the rainbow community. 14% of reports are from bisexuals, 23% of reports are from homosexuals, but the national average of reported sexual assaults has been found to be only 24%. People from the rainbow community feel that these attacks are motivated by other people's attitudes towards their sexual orientation. Managing Director of Auckland's Inside Out, Tabby Besley, said, "The issue is not just around violence. Members of the rainbow community are often facing severe mental health outcomes due to discrimination, often leading to depression, marginalisation, poverty, and ultimately substance abuse." She also says that transgender people and the gender fluid often face uncertainty about going to a women's refuge if they are living in a violent or otherwise dangerous situation. Speaking of Kiwis being discriminated against, did you know that the exact same thing is happening with our expats? Newsroom's senior political reporter Laura Walters recently published a comment piece about living in London throughout the pandemic. Her first winter Christmas was meant to be full of lights, festive markets and packed pubs, and waking up to dreams of snow. Instead, it was a backdrop of tens of thousands of COVID deaths. Our Kiwis overseas no longer wish to share their stories with New Zealand media because they're afraid of the backlash that they get, because we are here and they are not. Why do we allow that to continue? Is it because we don't have the room to house them? It turns out that in a country of 5 million people, there are only 600,000 rental properties, not including state housing. At the 2018 census, there were 196,506 vacant houses, with 39,000 of those in Auckland alone. We all know that the cost of living is fast outstripping household incomes for a majority of the population. How is somebody in my situation supposed to be able to save for their future when landlords and property managers only care about their own bottom line? As soon as the government rent freeze was lifted, the mean rent rose by $50 around the country. Some households even faced an increase of 40%. This was while people were still losing their jobs and struggling to make ends meet. If we can help the people who are struggling, then we can stop giving them all these extra benefits from the government. If they have enough money to support their families, they can send their kids to school with clothes, with shoes, with jackets, with lunch. We can afford our medications, our rent, our bills, all in the same week. All we want, just like everybody else, is to live with a little bit of dignity. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thanks, Stacey. You've really highlighted how huge swathes of our society are marginalised and subject to violence and discrimination. Thank you. Our final speaker is George Hobson, and I was going to introduce him by saying he's still at school, but I just heard this morning he's got an early entry to university. He's skipping his last year of school. But despite his young age, he's already got many years of conservation work under his belt, and he is the coordinator of Forest and Birds campaigns for the Youth Wing. Is that right? Come on up, George.
Here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, at least 4,000 species are threatened by or at risk of extinction. 90% of our original wetlands have been destroyed, introduced predators kill 25 million native birds every year, and 95% of our rivers in urban and non-native forest areas are polluted. Nature is being destroyed, and we are doing the destroying. But it isn't just the intrinsic value of nature and the plants and the animals themselves that suffer at this human-induced mass extinction. Leaders at the United Nations, the World Health Organization and the World Wildlife Fund told The Guardian in June 2020 that, quote, illegal and unsustainable wildlife trade as well as the devastation of forests and other wild places were still the driving forces behind the increasing number of diseases leaping from wildlife to humans. A World Wildlife Fund report also released in June 2020 said, quote, "The risk of a new wildlife to human disease emerging in the future is higher than ever, with the potential to wreak havoc on health, economies and global security. Indeed, it is people too that suffer at this destruction of nature." And nature is our lifeline. Rivers, lakes, forests, wetlands, dryland habitats all form crucial ecosystem services that amount to nothing less than our planet's lungs, kidneys and blood supply. Yet, presently around the world, our economic and societal structures act as if people are separate from nature and instead focus on exploiting the natural world for all we can get out of it. The environment has been commodified. Thus, for the health of both our people and our planet and our natural world, it is imperative that we urgently reverse the status quo. During lockdown last year, nature was afforded a small amount of breathing space. The reduction of cars throughout CBD areas allowed native birds to return to these locations which have historically been synonymous with the desecration of nature. Right here in Wellington, we saw amazing photos of karere, New Zealand falcon, and kereru, New Zealand pigeon, right outside our Parliament buildings in Wellington. So clearly this demonstrates that nature has been and will continue to be an inherent and crucially important part of everyday life. Yet it took a disaster of this magnitude for Kiwis to notice the incredible biodiversity and native species in their very own backyards, local parks and CBD areas. These fleeting moments of connection with nature throughout lockdown symbolise the incredible possibilities that can indeed come with a recovery from COVID-19. The current economic model of both our country and our planet is untenable and leads to increased market volatility, let alone a plethora of environmental and human well-being concerns, such as increasing weather events, fires, sea level rise, extinction, just to name a very few. So, just like it took a lockdown for many New Zealanders to recognise the incredible biodiversity in their backyard, maybe it's going to take us an event as significant as COVID-19 to recognise that actually, as Herman E. Daly said, the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment, not the other way around. Over the coming years, our government is going to spend tens of billions of dollars in the fight for so-called economic stability. And it is absolutely fundamentally crucial that these investments encourage and support the restoration and protection of our natural world, rather than perpetuate the status quo of environmental degradation. Nature must be put squarely at the heart of our COVID-19 recovery to ensure that both our people and our planet are healthy in the long term. If I look into the future, say 2, 5, 10, even 50 years away, I see 6 key changes that we must make in order to ensure that our economy and our nature are protected and our health of our future generations is preserved. These are: 1, invest in nature-friendly, low-carbon, resilient assets and infrastructure. Clean up and protect our freshwater ecosystems. Transition to ecosystem-based management of our marine environment. Uphold te tiriti o Waitangi and ensure meaningful tangata whenua inclusion and engagement. Focus on the connection between people and nature. And 6, give youth a voice. Because the decisions made today will place intergenerational economic, social and environmental debts, and we deserve a say on where our money is spent. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much.